Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in 30 seconds. But thank you guys so much for coming out tonight. I know it's a weekday, so thanks for taking the time out of your schedules to come. My name is Kripa, and I run the VMware Code program here. And I'll just take 30 seconds to talk about the program really quick. But VMware Code is our developer community here at VMware. We have over 12,000 members currently. And by signing up, it's free. Go to code.vmware.com/join. Again, that's code.vmware.com/join. To sign up with your email, it's totally free. You get access to APIs, code samples, software development kits, and then we also put on events like these. We have monthly meetups here on campus, and we run hackathons. We sponsor events for other developer-related activities. We run labs. So if you're interested in any of these things, join our community. And if you want to follow us on social media, we tend to keep everyone updated on events, especially like today. We've been posting on our Twitter a lot. VMware Code on Twitter. And with that, I'm going to take the time to introduce our first speaker, or our co-speaker for tonight, Dan Ilson, who works at VMware. Woo! So Dan's been with VMware for about 6 years now. He's a cloud advocate, and his team has been super integral to getting our VMware Code meetup group up and running. This is actually our second meetup group that's been completely just our own meetup group, and it's definitely big thanks to Dan and his team. Bill Shetty, sitting in the back, shout out to you. And with that, I'm going to let Dan introduce Brandon and their talk for tonight. So thank you guys again. Food and drink in the back. Please help yourselves.
Thanks, Kripa. So my name's Dan. I do work here and have worked here for a while now. 6 years sneaks up on you sometimes. So a couple years ago, I joined up with Mr. Shetty there in the back, who got a shout out a minute ago, to try to form the beginnings of a cloud advocacy team here at VMware, because it turned out we had a lot of stuff, we're building a lot of stuff that was related to people running on the public cloud, putting their applications there. We had a lot of customers that, while they had their data centers, they had their on-premises presence, they were also doing things in the public cloud. We had tools, we're building and acquiring tools that could help them, but they didn't know to come to us for some of these things. They had the picture in your head and said, yeah, VMware, you're from my data center. I know how that works. I know how I understand that process. I'll call you when I need you for there. But we had other pieces. So because our frequently changing job titles have been the source of some confusion, I thought I'd break it down a little bit for folks. So the way our team works, right? Native or public cloud. That is our focus. Our focus is based around the hyperscalers and Kubernetes from an infrastructure perspective. The unit of measure for us is not necessarily on infrastructure pieces, is on and about applications. That's what we care about. That's what we're interested in. That's what we engage with customers on. We have nothing against, vSphere, but there's 20,000 people at this company who do a really great job on vSphere. We figured we'd put a little focus onto some of the other things that were going on that our customers were concerned about and cared about. Okay, so when we talk about public cloud, that's not just infrastructure, okay? That's also the native services that the hyperscalers put out there, so things like Lambda, RDS, Cloud Run and Cloud Functions from Google, BigQuery, all these sort of things, these fall within our domain. They're part of the ecosystem now that we have to be concerned about. And then maybe most importantly, what are the actual usage and operations patterns for these applications in the public cloud? How do they differ? What do they look like? What problems do people run into there that they didn't run into in data centers, or they ran into different forms of in data centers, right? So those are the kind of things we look at. The advocacy side, we're not salespeople, although most of us used to be at one point or another. And we wear a lot of hats, right? There's another gentleman hiding in the back who's going to be really annoyed with me when I say his name, but Shri, all the way in the back there, works on our team. He's our lead developer guru. He's a much better coder certainly than I am, or I think anybody else on our team. So we wear that hat. You'll see an application tonight that our team built to demonstrate some of this stuff. Content creators, right? Whether we're here giving talks, whether we're putting blogs and other pieces up on our website, that kind of stuff. Solution architects, right? Putting pieces together for customers, getting involved in those discussions and helping them figure out how to combine some of these disparate pieces to manage applications as they migrate or exist in multiple domains. And then, in quotes, evangelist, because that's how we get introduced a lot, and that term means a lot of things to a lot of people. So if you have a negative connotation of it, focus on the quotes. If you don't, focus on the word in between the quotes. It's fine. But that's what we're out there for. We have a point of view. We're not going to apologize for it, but we're there to express it and try to use it to help people. Okay? So it's bidirectional for us, right? We're advocating for things to our customers. We're also advocating for things our customers want and need back here. So whether we're in any of the buildings around here up in San Francisco or at a show somewhere, we're taking what we see, what we hear, what people need, what we think people are going to need 6 months from now, and combining that together to help influence and feedback into what we do here, right? So you'll see these titles out there in the industry. Some people will call them developer advocates, developer relations, et cetera. It's a similar mix, right? It's just this is the version we put up here. As I mentioned, we threw a site together. So all of our stuff goes here. And I'm going to leave this up here so that it sits on the live stream for a minute and gets hopefully burned into someone's retinas. But it's all on cloudjourney.io. So there's 3 of us from the team here tonight, myself, Mr. Shetty, who's standing there taking pictures. Shree's hiding in the back. Oh, he'll wave, that's good. And then we have a couple gents in Texas, Sean and Tim, as well as Prabhu out on the East Coast these days. So the team's scattered around a bit, but that's where we put all our stuff. You can find us there, Twitter, go to GitHub if you want to find some of the stuff we wrote. So that's me, that's what I do here. Thankfully, it's not just me for the next hour, so that somebody might learn something. So I'm going to introduce Brandon Powell, who's with us from Armory tonight, and then Brandon's going to talk a little bit about Spinnaker, about specifically what Armory does in and around the Spinnaker community, and then we're going to walk through some pieces about how Spinnaker interacts with Kubernetes in general, and then specifically some VMware-based Kubernetes offerings, show off and demo some stuff along the way, and see what questions you guys have or if anything pops up. So with that, Brandon, you want to come over?
Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome.
All right, hello everybody. My name is Brandon. I'm a software engineer at Armory, so that means you can ask Kevin over there all the hard questions. Come on, I expect a little bit more laughter than that. Come on. Okay. I love to automate all the things. Anything I can automate, I will. You can follow me on GitHub and on Twitter. So those are my handles, so you can follow me. Okay. So I want to learn a little bit about you. How many of you are deploying to Kubernetes in production right now? Only a handful. Okay. How many of you are deploying with Spinnaker right now? So should I ask how many of you know what Spinnaker is? Okay, a little bit more hands. How many of you are evaluating Spinnaker right now? So we got 1, it looks like. Awesome, okay. So let me give you a little bit of history on Spinnaker. It was open source by Netflix and Google back in 2015. It was born from a product developed at Netflix called Asgard. 98% of deployments at Netflix are done via Spinnaker, including deployments to actual physical hardware, which is pretty neat. The boxes that Netflix puts inside of ISPs to make the data close to you, that is actually upgraded via Spinnaker. Not something I ever would have imagined. You can use Spinnaker to deploy hundreds or thousands of times a day. I think the Netflix does 6,000 times a day, more than that, somewhere around there. It's an insane amount. There are over 380 contributors including all the major cloud vendors, Google, Microsoft, Pivotal, Amazon. So there's tons of people contributing to the project. And here's some of the top contributors. There'll be another slide later on actually showing the users of Spinnaker. On the Spinnaker website, there's, I think, somewhere around like 50 company logos on there. If you are using Spinnaker and you want your logo on there, come find me, let me know, and I can help you put your logo on there. So what is Spinnaker, essentially? Spinnaker is an open source, multi-cloud, continuous delivery platform that helps you release software changes with high velocity and confidence. And we want high velocity, and we definitely want confidence. If we are not confident in our deployments, we're doing maybe one deployment a day, or one a week, maybe one a month, or maybe never. Yeah? So Spinnaker is a safe and efficient delivery regardless of frequency. Essentially, as I said, confidence, the same thing happens every time. It's application first, context where you need it. And my big thing with Spinnaker is it is essentially a single pane of glass. One place to look for everything across all of your deployments. So you have one place to see if you push up some new code to GitHub or to GitLab or wherever, and you can actually see the pipeline inside of Spinnaker kick off to do a deployment to production. You can follow it along. You can also look to see what is actually currently deployed in production. And if you have to, you can actually roll back. It makes it really easy to do these things. It's essentially focused on delivery, not on integration. It creates abstractions around common cloud resources like server groups, load balancers, firewalls. And again, it's just a common delivery mechanism. Everyone does it the same way across all teams. This way, you can have it so if somebody is jumping from one team to another, they don't need to learn the new archaic way of doing a deployment. It makes it so much easier. These are some of the targets that Spinnaker can deploy to. So AWS, Google, Kubernetes, OpenStack. And while we're here, VMware, Essential PKS. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Everybody raise the roof. Come on.
Can VMware be a bigger logo?
Yes, we could change that. It fit perfectly right there when I grabbed the image. But yes, no, we could definitely make that logo bigger. There's also integration platforms with Spinnaker. It can integrate into Slack, Jenkins, Chaos Monkey, or the new Gremlin. There's an image bakery, so there's Packer, webhook stages, events. It can integrate into most of your SDLC, the software development lifecycle. It's a mouthful to say. I think you're supposed to jump in now. Are you jumping in now or no?
Okay. You can keep going, by all means.
All right. So the Spinnaker community. I wanted to talk a little bit about what's been going on in the community. So we have something called special interest groups. There is a Kubernetes one. The next meeting for that is April 23rd. There's a security special interest group. That's the one that I run. That's actually tomorrow at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. I highly recommend you guys show up if you care about security. Can I get a hand raise of people who care about security? That should be everybody in the room. I said everybody in there. Oh, okay. But if you want to join, if you go to spinnaker.io/community/governance/SIGs, you will see a link to all of the SIG meetings. You can check out the agendas and join the Hangouts calls and make your voices heard. We want more people to join these special interest groups. We have a new one called for UI UX. That one meets on April 22nd. Spinnaker as Code, that one meets April 30th. And we have a new one that's being ran by Alex. Alex, you mind raising your hand? It's called onboarding. So if you're new to Spinnaker, this is a new SIG that has just been started that'll help you onboard onto Spinnaker. And right now we don't have a meeting time set up yet, but if you keep checking that page, this little link down here, you should find out when the next onboarding SIG meeting will be. I highly recommend you come and check it out. Hopefully this slide you can all see, these are the top contributors to Spinnaker. So from a community standpoint, we want all these numbers to be much higher, and we want more company names on this list. So we have Google, Netflix, Pivotal, Target, Armory, Microsoft, let's see, Streak, Squid, Shipstead, a whole bunch of other companies. We want your company on here as well. And if you want to start developing on Spinnaker, come talk to me. I'm more than happy to help. Anybody want to start developing on Spinnaker? You know, maybe adding vSphere integration to Spinnaker? Yes? No? Okay. Thanks, Kit. All right, so who uses Spinnaker? So this is slide 1 of 2. This is, again, pulled from the spinnaker.io website. So there's a bunch of companies on here. I'm sure people in this room have heard of 99% of these. Let's see. Here's the other one. The Shipstead folks have actually been helping out from the security side of things. They have been doing a lot of RBAC work for Spinnaker lately. They've been working with the Google team to help make Spinnaker care more about security. I'm not saying Spinnaker doesn't care, but security can always be improved, right? So the Shipstead folks have been working with Google and been doing an awesome job of making that a heck of a lot better. All right, so next I'm going to do a little walkthrough of Spinnaker. This is going to set the stage for Dan here and him doing a actual real demo. Okay, so let me actually go to the cool part. So this is where you would define your pipelines. What a Spinnaker pipeline is it's a way for you to take your application code and deploy it to, I'm going to say production, because that's exactly what we want. So I'm going to open up, and we're going to take a quick look at what this pipeline actually does. So can everybody see that in the back? I'm assuming by the silence I'm going to say yes. Thank you. So what this is going to do is it's actually using a trigger. So an automated thing is going to kick off this pipeline. We want to make it so that everything is automated. We don't need any manual steps. We don't need to, as in my last job, come in 5 a.m. on a Wednesday morning to do a deployment. I am not a morning person. 5 a.m. is not a good time for me. So with Spinnaker, we could have it set up so that when we push code, it automatically goes to production for us. That's what we want. So with this, we will first off deploy our code to our development environment. We will run some integration tests. And what we're actually going to do is we're actually going to deploy a canary. Everybody here knows what canaries are?
Tell me.
Okay, so it's that little bird that sits on your shoulder, and when you go down into a mine and the bird dies, you know to get the heck out of there. This is exactly the same thing. So if the canary fails, the new code that we want to deploy fails in production, we don't want to cause any major issues. We want to test that. And with that, we actually want to compare apples to apples, right? Comparing apples to oranges doesn't make much sense. So let's say our production instance has 100 pods out there in Kubernetes. Well, if we deploy one canary pod, comparing 1 to 100, that's not a very good comparison. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to deploy what we currently have in production again and compare the one deployment to a one deployment. It's pretty awesome. And then from there, we'll actually run the canary analysis. And then if the canary is successful, it'll actually deploy to production for us. If the canary is not successful, it won't. The pipeline's going to fail. And we can actually have it set up to send us a message in Slack or email or using SMS if we really want to. And have it tell us, hey, this has failed. We need to take a look at this. And it will also clean up the canary and the baseline that we deployed. So this is essentially what a pipeline looks like. And if I just click on one of these stages, I scroll down, make this a little smaller. There we go. We actually have a Kubernetes manifest here that will deploy a Docker image for us. It's pretty simple. This is going to help set the stage for Dan's presentation. And then what we can also do is we can take a look at our infrastructure. As I said, a single pane of glass. This is really what we want. So right here, this was the last time, right here. This is the last time my application was deployed. It was created on April 9th at 1:46 p.m. And what I can also do, if I notice that this is failing, I can click on the previous version. Oops. I can go here, actually. And nope. It's here. Nope, that's scaling, but OK. There is a way to do a rollback from here. I just don't remember off the top of my head. But you can roll back to a previous version inside of the UI here. But again, we shouldn't be having to do a rollback in this area because we can do this automatically inside of our pipeline as well. So there's a lot of really cool things that we can do. And we can also see load balancers if we have any. In this case, we don't. So our application that we deploy doesn't really, can't really see it. There's also firewalls, all that kind of fun stuff. And again, here's like canary configurations to actually do the canary analysis for us. So this is just a little basic run through of what the UI is. It's relatively simple. It's always getting better. That's what the UI UX SIG is for. If you are a UI engineer or a new UI engineer, join the UI UX SIG for Spinnaker, and you will definitely learn a bunch of stuff. It's really cool. All right. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dan to do his demo. Or do you want to?
Thanks. Yeah, we can come back through.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thanks for that, Brandon. This being a meetup on VMware's campus and run by VMware, I thought we should show some of this on top of some VMware stuff. Now, as Brandon mentioned earlier, and we'll be back in a few minutes to mention again, at the moment, there isn't yet what in Spinnaker parlance is a cloud driver. There's not an adapter for deploying directly to vSphere with Spinnaker today. There could be in the future, and I think there's some easy steps to get there, and Brandon's going to talk more about that. But in lieu of having a way to deploy it directly onto vSphere, I said, well, we've got Kubernetes offerings under our PKS family. We've got a nice fleet of them, so why don't we look at those? And so what we've done here is actually interesting. We're actually going to kind of do this demo across two flavors of PKS. My Armory Spinnaker instance is running in Cloud PKS, the managed service SaaS offering, right? So I dialed up a cluster, I took Armory's GKE installation instructions, hacked them apart for a while, put them back together, and with some kubeconfig surgery, managed to get my instance stood up and accessible from the outside world. What I then did was I built an Essentials PKS cluster on Amazon. So Essentials PKS, that offering came to us through the Heptio acquisition, right? So that used to be the Heptio Kubernetes subscription, which essentially is as close to pure as the driven snow vanilla Kubernetes as one can get. It is from source with their knowledge base and assistance, right? So thankfully, a couple of the folks on that team are friends of mine. I called them up and I said, Scott, Duffy, how do I get an Essentials PKS cluster up and running. They sent me some things and then made fun of me for futzing with kubeadm for a while, but eventually we got that up and running on Amazon. So now we have my Spinnaker instance running in one cluster, deploying Kubernetes manifests to a completely separate Kubernetes cluster that I have configured it to know to look for through Halyard. So Halyard is a command line configuration and deployment tool for Spinnaker, right? So that's where I make my config edits. I run it in a Docker container on my laptop. I use that to push my configuration out to my Spinnaker instance. It reconfigures and redeploys the necessary components, and then I can go to the UI like Brandon just did and do what I need to do. So in my case, I'm going to go to a slightly different instance of Spinnaker. So you'll now see a second one. And under here, I've configured an application and a pipeline. Now, the application I configured for is based on something our advocacy team has put together, which if any of you are interested in, I will attempt to one-handed type because I have a microphone. Aha. So this is where, of course, we keep all of our stuff, but the application in question here is our Acme Fitness demo, which, you know, it's about 7 microservices wide e-commerce sort of thing. So if you've seen, think hipster shop, think, well, it's a little more advanced than book info, but think something along those lines in terms of offering us a canvas to demonstrate and show all this. And then we've used essentially the instructions in this repo here. It's where we grabbed all the manifests to use, right? So you guys can do this. You can go here if you want to use this application for anything else yourself. But also, because Spinnaker is so extensible, you can configure an access token in GitHub to enable it to go grab and deposit software artifacts to and from GitHub, and those can be incorporated into your pipelines, right? So as you get down the path of automating every last thing, as Brandon likes to do, right, that's where you start to get where you're not entering this stuff yourself and typing it all in or copy and pasting it all into a stage in a pipeline like I had to do because I had to get a demonstration ready. But you know, you're actually connecting these software pieces as part of an end-to-end automated process so that nobody has to wake up at ungodly hours or come in on days where they'd really rather be doing other things. So, as we come back, and now, of course, the window is behind me. So here is my Acme Fit application that I put in, right? And I'm going to come down to my pipeline. So because we're deploying a whole bunch of microservices, I have a nice branching path pipeline, right? Because essentially, assuming my team has done our job and we've actually coded something correctly, our microservices shouldn't deploy on each other. So we should be able to parallelize most of this. So you can see I've named a lot of the stages in terms of what we're deploying, whether we're deploying config maps that hold kind of database seeds or databases themselves, or in fact, and microservices. Each of these steps goes through and is doing something very directly, deploying an individual piece and process so that I can see where something has failed, if it's failed, and kind of diagnose and troubleshoot it that way. Now, since I am here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to manually execute this pipeline, and we're actually going to let it run. Now, if I had access to my laptop, we could kubectl right into the cluster and you guys could see what's coming out and deploying. Essentially what's happening is we're setting the table for everything with a database. So our catalog service that backends, that has all the products in it, our user service that handles authentication, our cart service that has a Redis cache associated with it that holds all the objects the user is shopping for, right? Those all get turned up first. The users in the catalog have to get seeded with some data because otherwise they start out empty and there's nothing to buy and no one knows who you are. And that's a sad place to be. We also put up our payment and order service together because they're part of a flow, right? So the payment service comes up because the order service calls it and uses it as an endpoint. All the orders get shunted off into a Mongo database once they've been processed. Once those different streams happen in parallel, the last thing we do is we turn up here the front end. So we turn up our Node.js front end, a website comes up that everybody can see, and assuming that I have vamped for the right amount of time and the cluster has had a chance to go through and process and turn up everything, my application should come up now or relatively shortly, assuming I didn't butcher my link when I copied it into my slides. If I go back here, it wants to change on me as I do this. So, are we going to come up this time? Oh. It is yelling at me on my screen because it doesn't want to follow my link for reasons that are interesting and passing understanding. Oh, PowerPoint, you're going to make my life difficult. So as always, the prayers to the live demo gods have gone unanswered, and they have debated me, or they have eluded me for right now. But what you would see at the end of this execution here is a fully run through pipeline. Now, unlike Brandon's nice pipelines from before, mine come up yellow. I know why mine come up yellow. They do deploy everything they're supposed to. They come up yellow because Kubernetes RBAC and Spinnaker have an interesting relationship. And so right now, Spinnaker can't see that my manifests have actually been deployed correctly, even though they're sitting there, which is like kind of a funny place to be and always interesting. But there is a linkage that can be done there. I traced it back to an RBAC issue this afternoon that I ran out of hours in the day to troubleshoot. But the pipeline does run all the way through and configure correctly. So that's always a nice thing. Now, because this is vanilla Kubernetes essentially on Essentials PKS, we could do it basically on anything, right? We could, with the right smithing of the configuration on Halyard and other pieces, we could set this to deploy to Enterprise PKS, which runs on top of vSphere. So again, it's a deployment to vSphere, but through a layer of abstraction. We could set it to run to, again, Cloud PKS, like where I deployed my Spinnaker instance. We could also deploy our apps there. And we could deploy it really to any of the other, any vanilla Kubernetes cluster somebody wanted to stand up on their own on any infrastructure. So there's a nice flexibility and a power there to that. So I will go curse PowerPoint for not being able to follow certain formats of links. But now that we've gotten to this point of it, since we have talked around the vSphere issue a little bit and kind of where that is, I'd like to have Brandon come back up and talk to us a little bit about what we could do with a vSphere cloud driver and kind of where Spinnaker and VMware could go on from there on the subject of making logos bigger and a little more comprehensive on slides. So Brandon, if you wouldn't mind coming back over.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers.
So who here has heard of vSphere? Nobody. Wow. No, everybody. vSphere's been what was that? Did you say something? Oh, okay. vSphere's been around for a very long time. Awesome product. How can we integrate it in with Spinnaker? Well, let's talk about baking. Not baking cookies. I'm a type 1 diabetic. Cookies and I don't get along. Baking. So AWS has AMIs, Amazon Machine Images. Spinnaker, under the hood, uses a tool called Packer. And Packer can actually build these AMIs. Google also has images. Spinnaker can use Packer to build the Google images. What about vSphere? There's already vSphere support for Packer. There is 2 different Packer utilities, VMware ISO and VMware VMX. So half of the work is kind of already done for us. So we could use Packer to actually have a vSphere image that we could use. Now, the hard part is doing the deployment. That's where we need help. This is where, if there's anybody here who's a vSphere expert that wants to contribute code to Spinnaker, come find me after. Let's talk. Love to talk about this. So as Dan mentioned, Spinnaker has a microservice called Cloud Driver. It essentially does all the cloud things. This is where a deployment to vSphere, this is where the code would be. And it needs to be updated to deploy to vSphere. Do I have any volunteers right now to do this? Can I get at least one person to raise their hand? Thanks, Kevin. No, we need more people to help contribute, and if we can get somebody to help with the vSphere side of things, this would be fantastic. This could mean that we could deploy to Essential PKS in the cloud. We could deploy to vSphere and our local data centers, because there's still people out there that have local data centers. Why not? Let's work together on this. We would also need to add a new stage. So those little, when we had the pipelines up, each one of those individual things was called the stage. We need to have a UI around how we do a deployment. Because for, let's say, Amazon, there's different things than there is for Google. And there's obviously going to be different things for vSphere. So we would need to configure that. Load balancers. I know vSphere has this ability to do something along these lines. Let's use those APIs to actually enable load balancers. As you saw previously in the infrastructure tab, there is a section for load balancers. We could have that exposed in the Spinnaker UI, and that would be fantastic. It would make it more of a first-class citizen. And with that, to make it a true first-class citizen with Spinnaker, does anybody here know what a red-black deployment is? Do you know what a blue-green deployment is? Okay. Do you know what Netflix's colors are? Red and black. So if you use Spinnaker, it is called a red-black deployment, not a blue-green deployment. Kind of funny. So with that, we have deployment strategies. And this is something to make vSphere a first-class citizen, like AWS, GCP, and actually very soon for Kubernetes, we need a Highlander strategy. You know, there can only be one. Man, thank you. These jokes are not the best. I need to up my joke game. That's kind of what I'm hearing now. We need red-black deployments. We need rolling red-black deployments. With Kubernetes, Highlander and red-black is actually coming next month as native to Spinnaker, just like it is for AWS and for GCP. If we could do this for vSphere, this would also make it a first-class citizen. Let me go back to here. So right now, if you want to do like a red-black deployment for Kubernetes, you have to do that all yourself. You have to do the same thing for vSphere. So if we do this deployment to production here, scroll down, you know, you'd have in your manifest all the stuff to do the red-black. You have to write that all yourself. That doesn't seem very fun, right? We want it to be a first-class citizen. We want the same for vSphere. So at first, it may not be there, but if we can get more people's help in on this, we could make a red-black deployment, a rolling red-black, a Highlander strategy, all a part of a native Spinnaker experience. Because again, that's what we want. We want this to be easy for people to do deployments to. You shouldn't have to think about how your code's deployed. It's 2019. We should just be able to do a git add, a git commit, a git push, or if you're me, if you watched any of my previous meetup videos, I just do it all in the GitHub UI. You know, the best way of committing code and committing directly to master. Okay, I got more laughs on that one. Good. So we obviously want to make it so it is a very easy process, something that the developers don't even need to care about doing. They write their code, they push it up, and bam, it's deployed for them. As long as it passes an automated canary analysis, as long as the integration tests pass, as long as any other type of testing that needs to be done passes. This is exactly what we want. We want to stop this whole manual process. And as in Dan's presentation, he had he clicked the start manual execution. If you go back to pipelines, he just clicked this. We shouldn't even be clicking this button anymore. In our case, we actually have a trigger enabled, as I said before. If you go to our configuration, this Jenkins job, once this Jenkins job completes, this pipeline automatically gets kicked off. I don't need to be watching anything anymore. And what's even better about this is I'll get pinged in Slack if there's an issue. Pretty simple, right? This is what we want to head towards. So with that, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for Dan or I? More than happy to answer them. Yeah?
Why would someone use Spinnaker over just like GitLab CI or just Jenkins?
Okay. Really good question. So I actually have a lot of experience with GitLab CI, and it is pretty nice, right? But it doesn't have that whole concept of a single pane of glass, where you can see the infrastructure that's actually deployed, what the current infrastructure is. That's just not there with GitLab CI at this point. Same thing with Jenkins. Another thing is that there's a pretty UI for this. There's not a bunch of YAML or Groovy or whatever. Is it Groovy for Jenkins? Something along those lines. You don't have to deal with that. It's very, here, we can actually go back here, move this over. So if I'm doing like a deployment to production or to dev, I can choose the account that we're deploying to, and I can just paste. Actually, we don't even want to paste the YAML in for this. What we can actually do is click on artifact and have it point to a Git repo and say, this file is what is going to be my deployment. So you have it versioned. You have the who, the what, the why, the where, and the when, right? The 5 whys. That is why you'd want to use something like Spinnaker. Did that answer your question? Yeah. What was that?
What infrastructure components
Mhm.
can be handled by Spinnaker? Just aware of things like, is aware of things like the storage compliance.
Could you repeat the question for the folks on the phone?
Sure. So the question was what infrastructure constructs can Spinnaker track? What is it aware of from an infrastructure perspective?
So anything that it can deploy. So in this case, if we go to our infrastructure tab, we are, in this example, we're just deploying Kubernetes pods, so it's able to track that. If there was a firewall or if there was a load balancer, it'd be able to track that. If it's AWS, you can track all of the machines that you have. So pretty much anything that you can deploy, it can track.
If the pod refers to the persistent volume, can it track the storage?
Okay, if a pod refers to a persistent volume in Kubernetes, can it track that piece of storage?
No, it cannot, at least right now. But if you go to the Kubernetes SIG, tell them about it. My good coworker, Ethan, he is an awesome guy. I'm sure he would love to hear about that. Any other questions?
Since you asked a question, you win some socks. I was informed I have to give away socks.
Can we deploy socks?
Well, we can see how far Kripa can throw them.
Okay. Can we do that via Spinnaker? Can we automate this?
Well, we can try. There were some more questions over here. I can run with a microphone.
I just wanted to contribute with the question about what Spinnaker can do that some of the other CI/CD tools don't. And that something that's been really beneficial in our production deployment is that we have multiple AWS accounts hooked up to Spinnaker, and because it does an inventory of all the resources, as was being spoken about here, if anyone's here ever had one of those Amazon emails, you know, instance whatever's going to go offline at a certain time, you can just take that instance ID, paste that into the Spinnaker UI, whether it's managed by Spinnaker or not, it'll tell you which account it's in, whether it's up and alive and running. That's a pretty cool feature in itself. But being able to see across the multiple accounts is really key to managing like multiple things.
So with that, you can have this is called an application view. You can have as many accounts as you want. So you can even go down to like a per Kubernetes namespace to have better RBAC control and say this, we only want this thing deployed to this thing. You could have all of that configured and viewable inside of the UI. It makes it really awesome. Was there another question over there, I thought?
Yeah, right, Google has Tecton, right? They don't talk about it much, but it's on the website.
Yep.
You know, it launched at the same time the Continuous Delivery Foundation did.
Yep.
It just seems like that's going to compete head on with Spinnaker. Is that the case?
No, so I'm actually working on a proposal to add Tecton integration into Spinnaker. So currently, with Spinnaker, you can't necessarily very easily run random jobs, let's say, like building a Docker image. You can call out to Jenkins to do that, or if you wait till next month, my awesome coworker Ethan added the ability to run Kubernetes jobs. So with that, Tecton is something that could technically augment Spinnaker and allow you to have everything controlled via Spinnaker and Kubernetes. So if you're all in on Kubernetes, Knative, yay, you can do all of it inside of Spinnaker and have no Jenkins anymore, no Travis CI, no drone, get rid of all of the other stuff and just have Kubernetes and Spinnaker. And that's it. From a deployment standpoint, from a DevOps, from a sysadmin standpoint, managing two things as opposed to the traditional, you have like your Chef server, you have your maybe Ansible Tower, you have maybe Red Hat Satellite, a bunch of other different things. This makes it a heck of a lot easier. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, very much.
Awesome. Anybody else have any questions?
I got 2 more pairs of socks.
Does anybody
Even if
want
the
2
question's
pairs
like,
of
how's
socks?
your day? I'm okay with that.
I have a less technical question.
Yeah.
You come referring to this phrase, vSphere first-class citizen.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So the question was, what do I mean by vSphere as a first-class citizen?
And if we do this, then we'll be a first-class citizen.
Yes. So the old style of doing Kubernetes deployments with Spinnaker used the same kind of concepts that AWS and GCP for Spinnaker were used. So it was a UI that you dropped, a few drop downs, picked a few things. That wasn't native to how you do Kubernetes stuff. When you do Kubernetes, you have a manifest, right? So when we added the new Kubernetes provider version 2, we made Kubernetes more of what's called a first-class citizen. We treated it as if it was an actual thing. We were doing it the way it should be done. And that's what I mean with vSphere. We want to do it the way in which vSphere stuff is done, but still following at least similar constructs inside of Spinnaker, but making it to where somebody who is familiar with vSphere can look at it and say, oh, hey, that's how I do it. That's pretty easy. Because again, the old way with the Kubernetes provider, if you were very familiar with Kubernetes, you were very lost. And that's not what we want. We want this to be if you know the product already, so Kubernetes or vSphere, we want it to be very simple for you to actually do it.
Is that just like a UX consideration?
Yes.
Okay.
UX consideration, and then also the different types of features that we expose. So if we don't have the ability to do load balancers or maybe like the Highlander or red-black strategy, well, those are real things that people want to use. And if they're not there, they're probably not going to want to use this, right? They're going to use whatever tooling allows them to do the new innovative way of doing deployments. So that's also what I mean. That make sense?
Yeah, like if we wanted to do some of these things in vSphere, right? So for example, if we wanted to configure load balancers in vSphere, we'd basically have to plummet to hit NSX APIs to deploy a load balancer, right? Because it's not a native load balancer construct in vSphere today per se, right? We'd have to go to NSX or some other component to do that. To do some of the rolling traffic strategies around some of those like higher order deployments, like, yeah, we'd need a little extra help. We'd need some other pieces to do it. So I think it's more about assembling a more complete feature set so that we can use the same deployment strategies, whether it's here, there, anywhere else, right? Regardless of what the infrastructure endpoints that the deployment goes on to is. Does that sound reasonable?
That's actually a much better way of putting it than I did.
I summarize well.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think there's a question back there.
I took my microphone with me.
Hey, we use like the combination of tools like Terraform and Ansible kind of thing to deploy our infrastructure stack.
Mm-hmm.
Can Spinnaker can kind of discover that? I mean, you can put it on top of it to discover it and manage it then?
Yeah, so the Armory version of Spinnaker actually has the ability to do Terraform deployments. So with that, you can actually have what's called a Terraform stage. You can look at it in the UI and actually have it deploy your infrastructure along with your whatever application you're deploying to there. So if you want to use it to, let's say, construct a new development environment, deploy the application, run some tests, and then destroy everything, that's totally possible.
So can it discover the existing one, infrastructure?
Existing infrastructure, you would have to configure that yourself. They are working on a proposal to do something called dynamic account. So we could dynamically add accounts, and Spinnaker should be able to, if you point it at the right things, be able to figure out what accounts are there and add them in. So that is being talked about right now. It's in the very early stages.
It will if you have it in the same account that you already have.
Mm-hmm.
So what he's talking about is like if you spin up a brand new AWS account, it's not going to show up.
Mm-hmm.
AWS account, like a parent account or child account. So having just individual accounts, those ones we're working on getting dynamic account creation so that those will automatically come in. And then for infrastructure like EC2 instances in a configured account, those are already going to pop up.
So yeah, on that, so if you have, I don't know, if you go, I'll just give the example. If you go to the Amazon console and you launch an instance, so it would be agnostic to anyway if you created Ansible or anything like that. That instance ID will show up in Spinnaker's inventory if that account is already plumbed into Spinnaker as a managed account. Is that what you're trying to ask?
No, so mine was made of, we have internal infrastructure which is already set up. We use our own Oracle Cloud. So I wanted to kind of see how to overlay Spinnaker to manage it then. Because right now the management portal is a challenge for us to manage that infrastructure.
Okay, I'm not sure about Oracle Cloud.
I'm also not 100% sure about Oracle Cloud, but for the infrastructure itself, as long as the accounts are there, the Spinnaker polls the cloud provider every 30-ish seconds for every resource type, and then they'll populate it in the UI or through the API for you to consume.
Because I was reading about that, Spinnaker has the cloud provider as Oracle Cloud.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Oracle team is working a lot with Spinnaker, so they have like 5 or 6 people who are contributing. I used to work there. So.
I haven't touched the Oracle piece myself, but it would be an interesting piece to try.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you guys very much. I greatly appreciate it. Thanks for having me.